I guess we just picked the better versions, my daughter-in-law said with a smile when I asked why I wasn't in a single photograph on their hallway wall. I stood there holding my purse with both hands, staring at frame after frame of smiling faces beneath soft golden lighting. Daniel holding Chloe on his shoulders at the county fair. Madison laughing beside the Christmas tree in matching pajamas. Family beach trips in Florida. Thanksgiving dinners. Birthdays. Anniversaries. Years of memories carefully displayed along the long white hallway of their beautiful suburban home, outside Columbus, Ohio. And somehow, in every single picture I was gone. At first, I honestly thought I was imagining things. At 68, you begin second-guessing your memory sometimes. At least that's what people gently imply when they repeat themselves too slowly, or explain your own phone back to you. So I stepped closer to the wall and adjusted my glasses. The frames were arranged with such care that it almost looked like a magazine spread. Matte black borders. Warm filters. Perfect smiles. Perfect lighting. Perfect family. But not one picture included me. Not one. My chest tightened slowly, the way it does before a thunderstorm. That's strange, I said quietly. I remember being there for this one. I pointed toward a photo from Chloe's middle school graduation party 2 years earlier. I remembered standing beside the cake in my pale blue cardigan while Chloe held my arm and laughed because the frosting had melted in the July heat. I remembered it clearly because Thomas had died only 6 months before, and that was the first family gathering where I had forced myself to smile again. But in the framed picture, there was only Chloe standing beside the cake alone. Madison walked over carrying a tray of sparkling water glasses, her blonde hair perfectly curled, her cream sweater untouched by a single wrinkle. "Oh," she said lightly, barely glancing at the wall. "I probably just picked the cleaner version." Cleaner version. The word settled strangely in my stomach. Daniel didn't even look up from the football game playing in the living room. "Mom, you know Madison's always editing photos. For the family albums," he said casually. "She's good at that stuff. Good at that stuff." I nodded slowly even though something inside me had started to feel cold. Chloe came down the stairs a moment later, her dark ponytail swinging behind her, and immediately noticed my expression. "Grandma?" she asked softly. "You okay?" "Of course," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "I was just looking at all these beautiful memories." Madison smiled again then. That same smooth smile she always wore when neighbors stopped by unexpectedly, or when someone complimented her decorating. It never quite reached her eyes. "I wanted the hallway to feel modern," she explained. "Less cluttered. Less cluttered." I looked back at the photographs one more time. Suddenly, I noticed things I hadn't seen before. In one Christmas picture, part of my sleeve remained near the edge where someone had clearly been cropped out. In another, Daniel's arm rested awkwardly in empty space, like he had once been standing beside someone no longer there. My throat felt dry. "Excuse me," I murmured. I walked quietly toward the downstairs bathroom and closed the door behind me. The house smelled faintly of vanilla candles and fresh paint. Everything inside it looked polished and carefully controlled, just like Madison herself. I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at my reflection in the mirror. Silver hair neatly pinned back. Small pearl earrings. Soft wrinkles around tired blue eyes. I suddenly remembered another afternoon almost 5 years earlier when Madison had posted Thanksgiving pictures online and tagged everyone except me. At the time she claimed the app must have glitched. Then there was Chloe's dance recital album where I somehow disappeared from every group photo even though I had been sitting front row beside Daniel. Tiny things. Small enough to dismiss. Easy to excuse. Until they weren't. I stayed in the bathroom longer than necessary, listening to the muffled laughter outside the door. When I finally came back out, Madison was already helping Chloe arrange appetizers in the kitchen island, while Daniel shouted at the television from the couch. The hallway glowed softly behind them, lined with memories that looked almost real. And for the first time, I realized my daughter-in-law hadn't been forgetting me all these years. She had been removing me. I barely slept that night after returning home from Daniel and Madison's house. The image of that hallway stayed with me long after I turned off the bedroom lamp. I kept seeing those smiling faces arranged beneath warm lighting while my own had vanished as if I had never belonged there to begin with. Around 2 in the morning, I finally got out of bed and walked downstairs to the living room. My house felt painfully quiet at night now. Ever since Thomas passed away 3 years earlier, silence had become its own kind of roommate. Sometimes I still expected to hear the floor creak beneath his footsteps or the sound of him clearing his throat while reading in his recliner. Instead, there was only the soft ticking of the grandfather clock near the fireplace and the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I switched on the small lamp beside the bookshelf and sat down carefully on the carpet in front of the cedar chest where I kept our old family albums. The brass handle felt cold against my fingers. Thomas used to joke that I guarded those albums better than a bank-protected gold bars. Memories matter more, I always told him. At the time he laughed. Now I understood just how true that was. I lifted the first heavy album onto my lap and slowly turned the thick plastic pages. There we were 20 years earlier standing in front of our first lake cabin rental in Michigan. Daniel had his arm around me while Thomas held a fishing pole and smiled into the sunlight. Another page showed Christmas morning from 2004. Wrapping paper covered the floor. Daniel looked exhausted from staying up all night assembling Chloe's dollhouse, while I stood beside him holding a tray of cinnamon rolls. Back then, every picture felt imperfect in the best possible way. Someone was always blinking. Someone looked awkward. Someone spilled punch on their sweater. But we were all there. Together. I kept turning pages until I reached more recent years. That was when the strange feeling returned. At first, the changes were subtle. In one Easter photo, only half my shoulder remained at the edge of the frame. Another picture showed everyone gathered around the dining table, while an empty chair sat strangely beside Chloe. My chair. I remembered because my knee had been hurting badly that afternoon, and Daniel insisted I sit near the window where the light was better. Yet somehow, in the printed version I had disappeared completely. I leaned closer to the page, my stomach tightening. Then I noticed something else. The older albums ended abruptly around 6 years ago, right around the time Madison started organizing all the family photos digitally. After that, there were almost no printed pictures at all. Everything became online albums, holiday slideshows, framed enlargements on their walls. Carefully edited, carefully selected, carefully controlled. I closed the album slowly and rubbed my tired eyes. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I really was being oversensitive. That was the word older women were always given when something felt wrong. Sensitive. Emotional. Confused. I stood up and carried the album toward the bookshelf when something slipped loose from between the pages and landed softly on the hardwood floor. It was an old photograph I had not seen in years. Thomas and I stood together in front of our first house, both of us laughing while paint cans sat around the porch steps. On the back, written in Thomas's familiar handwriting, were 6 simple words that made my chest ache. Do not let them erase you, Evie. I sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, staring at the faded ink while the clock ticked softly beside me. Thomas had written that only 8 months before he died. And suddenly, for the first time since visiting Daniel's house, I began to wonder if my husband had noticed something long before I ever did. The next morning, rain pressed softly against the kitchen windows while I stood at the counter making coffee for one. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candle I had forgotten to blow out the night before. I kept Thomas's photograph beside the sugar jar now, the one with his handwritten note on the back. I must have read those 6 words 20 times before. Sunrise. Do not let them erase you, Evie. The strange thing was that Thomas had never been dramatic. In 42 years of marriage, he rarely spoke in warnings or riddles. He believed problems could usually be solved with patience, hard work, and enough kindness. Which was exactly why those words unsettled me so deeply. Around 9 o'clock, I carried my coffee upstairs to the small office Thomas once used for bookkeeping during tax season. Most of his things were still exactly where he left them. Legal pads stacked neatly beside the printer. His old reading glasses folded carefully near the desk lamp. Even after 3 years, I had not found the courage to change much. Grief has a way of turning ordinary objects into sacred ones. I sat down slowly in his leather chair and opened the bottom file drawer where Thomas kept family documents. At first, I did not know what I was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe I only wanted to feel close to him again. But then I found a thin manila folder labeled simply Photos. Inside were several envelopes filled with printed pictures and small handwritten notes attached with paper clips. My heartbeat slowed strangely as I lifted the first bundle into my lap. The notes were dated over several years. One read, "Madison replaced the original Christmas photo again." Another simply said, "Evie missing from frame at Daniel's office." I stared at the handwriting, unable to breathe for a moment. Thomas had noticed. He had noticed everything. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened another envelope. Inside were 2 copies of the same family photograph from Chloe's 10th birthday party. In the first version, I stood beside the kitchen table holding balloons while Chloe leaned against my shoulder laughing. In the second version, the one Madison eventually posted online, I was gone completely. The empty space beside Chloe had been blurred carefully with decorations from the background. It looked natural unless you knew what had once been there. Unless you remembered the truth. I sat frozen in the chair while rain tapped softly against the office window. Suddenly, memories began returning with painful clarity. Madison always volunteering to organize family albums. Madison insisting she handle holiday cards because she understood modern design better. Madison gently taking framed photographs from my house after Thomas died because she wanted to help update everything. At the time, I thought she was trying to support me. I thought she was helping an older woman overwhelmed by loss. Now I wondered how many pieces of my life had quietly disappeared, while I thanked her for the kindness. There was one final note folded carefully at the bottom of the folder. Thomas's handwriting looked shakier there, as if he had written it near the end of his illness. I tried talking to Daniel once. He said I was imagining things. But I know what I see. Madison wants a perfect family image. Perfect families do not include aging mothers. I covered my mouth with my hand and closed my eyes. The pain was not loud. It was not explosive. It settled slowly into my chest like cold winter air slipping beneath a door. The worst part was realizing Thomas had carried this worry alone while he was dying. He saw what was happening to me before I ever allowed myself to see it. My phone buzzed suddenly on the desk beside me, making me jump. A text from Madison appeared across the screen. "Do you want me to send over the photos from Sunday?" Chloe looked adorable. I stared at the message for several seconds before setting the phone face down on the desk. Because for the first time, I was no longer wondering whether I had imagined everything. I was beginning to understand that my disappearance had been carefully planned for years. 3 days passed before I saw Daniel and Madison again. Chloe had a regional choir performance at her high school auditorium, and despite everything sitting heavy inside my chest, I still arrived 30 minutes early with a bouquet of white roses resting carefully on the passenger seat beside me. Some habits survive heartbreak. I had attended every school concert, every dance recital, every awkward middle school talent show since Chloe was 5 years old. Thomas used to say I could probably navigate the school parking lot blindfolded by now. The November air carried a sharp chill as parents hurried toward the building wrapped in wool coats and scarves. Inside, the lobby buzzed with polite laughter and the smell of burnt coffee from the concession table. I spotted Daniel immediately near the auditorium doors. He looked tired lately. More gray threaded through his dark hair than I remembered even 6 months ago. "Mom," he said warmly, kissing my cheek. "Glad you made it." For one painful second, he sounded like my son again. Not Madison's husband. Not the distracted man staring through football games while his mother vanished from family photographs. Just my boy. "I would not miss this," I replied softly. Then Madison appeared beside him carrying her phone already raised in camera position. "Chloe looks beautiful tonight," she said. "We are getting so many pictures." Something in the way she said pictures made my stomach tighten. During intermission, families gathered near the lobby while students rushed around in matching Navy choir robes. Chloe ran straight into my arms, slightly breathless and smiling. "Grandma, did you hear my solo?" she asked excitedly. "You were wonderful," I told her honestly. "Your grandfather would have been so proud." Madison stepped forward immediately. "Let us get a quick family photo before second half starts." We gathered near the decorated wreath display beside the auditorium entrance. Daniel stood beside Chloe while Madison adjusted everyone carefully with small movements of her manicured hands. "Daniel, a little closer to Chloe," she said. "Mom, maybe shift slightly left because the lighting is uneven." I obeyed automatically. Years of motherhood train women to cooperate first and question later. Madison lifted her phone and smiled brightly. "Perfect." Flash. Then another. Flash. A third. Chloe suddenly frowned at the screen. Wait, she said quietly. Grandma's face got blocked in that one. Madison laughed softly. It is fine. I can fix it later. Fix it later. The words landed differently now. Before I could respond, another parent approached Madison to compliment the choir performance, and the conversation drifted away. But Chloe remained beside me, still staring thoughtfully toward her mother. Grandma, she said after a moment, lowering her voice. Can I ask you something weird? Of course. She hesitated. Has Mom always edited photos a lot? I felt my heartbeat slow. Why would you ask that? Chloe looked uncomfortable. A few months ago I was trying to find old pictures for a school memory project. I noticed there were duplicate folders on Mom's laptop. Some said edited and some said originals. She shrugged lightly. I just thought it was strange. The noise of the crowded lobby seemed to fade around me. Did you open them? I asked carefully. Not really. Mom came in and got upset. She said the originals were messy and unflattering. Chloe paused again. But I remember seeing you in some of the originals. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Across the lobby, Madison stood laughing beside another mother, while holding her phone tightly against her chest. She looked elegant, composed, untouchable. But for the first time I noticed something else beneath the polished surface. Watchfulness. Every few moments her eyes drifted back toward us. Toward me. Toward Chloe. As if she suddenly realized the silence she had spent years building around me was beginning to crack. 2 afternoons later, Chloe showed up at my front door carrying a cardboard storage box nearly half her size. The November wind had turned bitter overnight, and her cheeks were pink from the cold as she stepped inside my house. Mom thinks I am studying at Ashley's, she said quietly while setting the heavy box near the dining room table. I probably should not be here. I closed the front door slowly behind her. Then why are you? Chloe glanced down at the box. Because I think something is wrong. The words settled heavily between us. I led her into the kitchen and made hot chocolate the way Thomas used to make it for her when she was little, with extra marshmallows and a pinch of cinnamon stirred into the milk. For a while neither of us spoke much. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the old heater hummed through the house. Chloe sat twisting the sleeve of her sweatshirt around her fingers, the same nervous habit Daniel used to have as a teenager. Finally she looked up at me. Grandma, Mom keeps deleting things. I stayed very still. What kind of things? Photos mostly. Files too. Chloe swallowed hard. Last weekend she got upset because Dad uploaded an old picture from our camping trip years ago. The one where you and Grandpa were teaching me how to fish. She made him take it down. A dull ache spread slowly through my chest. I remembered that trip. Chloe had been 8 years old and terrified to touch the worms in the bait container. Thomas spent nearly an hour pretending to be scared too just to make her laugh. Did she say why? I asked softly. Chloe hesitated. She told Dad the picture looked outdated and messy. Her eyes drifted toward the storage box sitting beside the dining room chair. But that is not really why. She reached down and opened the box carefully. Inside were dozens of old printed photographs, photo albums, and loose envelopes tied together with fading ribbon. My breath caught instantly. I recognized the floral scrapbook paper from years ago. Where did you find these? In the attic. Chloe lowered her voice further. Mom moved them there after Grandpa died. I walked slowly toward the box and lifted the top album into my hands. Dust clung lightly to the corners. Inside were photographs I had not seen in years. Family cookouts. Road trips. Christmas mornings before sunrise. Thomas asleep in his recliner with Chloe curled against his shoulder. And in every single photograph I was there. Not hidden near the edges. Not blurred into the background. Present. Smiling. Loved. Chloe sat quietly across from me while I turned the pages one by one. Grandpa used to keep these downstairs, she said. I remember because he looked through them all the time after he got sick. I paused suddenly on one photograph from Daniel's 40th birthday dinner. Madison stood near the kitchen counter smiling toward the camera, while her hand rested lightly on Daniel's shoulder. But her eyes were not looking at him. They were fixed directly on me. The expression on her face was not anger exactly. It was something colder. Calculation. Chloe noticed the way I stared at the picture. Grandma, she whispered carefully. "I heard Mom talking to Aunt Rebecca once after Thanksgiving. She said old people make family photos feel depressing." The room became very quiet after that. I looked down at the album resting open in my lap while rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Every page felt less like a memory now and more like evidence. Evidence that someone had spent years slowly rewriting the story of our family one photograph at a time. That evening after Chloe left, I carried every photo album into the living room and spread them across the coffee table like pieces of a puzzle I had spent years refusing to solve. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the neighborhood silent except for the occasional hiss of tires passing over wet pavement. The lamp beside Thomas's recliner cast a soft amber glow across the room, while I carefully sorted photographs into stacks by year. Weddings, birthdays, summer vacations, Christmas mornings. Slowly, patterns began emerging so clearly that I wondered how I had missed them before. The older photographs felt warm and crowded with life. There I was teaching Chloe how to roll pie dough in my kitchen. There I was beside Daniel at his college graduation with tears running down my face because Thomas kept squeezing my hand so proudly. Every picture carried small imperfections that made them real. Someone always leaned too far forward. Someone blinked. Someone laughed too hard. But beginning around the same time Madison took over organizing family albums, something changed. The pictures became polished, controlled, symmetrical, the colors brighter, the smiles tighter, and little by little I disappeared. Sometimes only an elbow remained near the edge of a frame. Sometimes a strange empty space appeared where I remembered standing. In one 4th of July photograph, the entire left side looked awkwardly blurred near the picnic table. I remembered exactly what had been there. Me holding Chloe while fireworks burst overhead. I sat back slowly against the couch cushions and closed my eyes. It was not just editing. It was revision. A careful reshaping of family history until I no longer existed inside it. My phone buzzed quietly beside me. A message from Daniel. "Mom, Madison uploaded the choir pictures tonight. Chloe's solo shots turned out great." For a moment I considered ignoring it. Instead, I opened the family social media page and felt my stomach tighten almost instantly. There were 12 new photographs from the concert. Chloe smiling on stage. Daniel beside the wreath display. Madison laughing with another choir parent. In one group picture, I could barely see the side of my coat near the edge before the image abruptly cropped inward. Another picture showed Chloe standing alone with the bouquet of white roses I had brought her. The caption beneath it read, "Proud choir mama moment." I stared at the screen for several long seconds. Not grandmother. Not family. Not even flowers from grandma. Just another carefully cleaned version of reality. A strange calm settled over me then. Not anger exactly. Clarity. For years I had treated every incident separately because that was easier than facing the larger truth. Easier to believe in glitches and misunderstandings than intentional cruelty wrapped in politeness. But now the evidence sat all around me in neat little stacks across my living room. Madison had not erased me out of hatred. Hatred would have required emotion. What she felt was embarrassment. I no longer fit the image she wanted displayed to the world. Older women with soft wrinkles and sensible shoes did not belong in her polished version of family life. Especially widows who reminded everyone that time moved forward whether people wanted it to or not. Around midnight, I carried the final album back toward the cedar chest when another loose photograph slipped free and drifted onto the floor beside my feet. I bent down slowly to pick it up. It was one of my favorites from years ago. Chloe asleep against my shoulder during a long drive home from Tennessee, while Thomas snapped the picture from the front seat. Across the bottom corner, in Madison's handwriting, someone had written the word replace. I stared at the ink for a very long time. Then I walked quietly to the kitchen, opened the junk drawer beside the refrigerator, and removed the small portable scanner Thomas bought years earlier for organizing old tax receipts. I set it carefully on the dining room table beside the albums. Because for the first time since all of this began, I was no longer interested only in remembering the truth. I was preparing to restore it. For the next 2 weeks, my dining room slowly transformed into something between an archive and a confession booth. Every morning after breakfast, I carried another stack of photographs from the cedar chest to the scanner Thomas bought years ago. The machine made a soft humming sound each time it pulled an image beneath the glass. And with every scan, another missing piece of my life quietly returned. I worked slowly, carefully wiping fingerprints from old prints with the edge of a microfiber cloth, the way Thomas taught me years earlier. Some photographs were nearly 30 years old, their corners bent softly with time. Others still carried faint traces of perfume, lake water, sunscreen, or cigarette smoke from family gatherings long gone. Memory clings to objects in strange ways. Chloe started visiting twice a week after school. She would slip through the front door still wearing her backpack and help organize digital folders on my laptop, while I scanned photographs beside her. "We should label these by year," she said one afternoon while chewing absent-mindedly on the end of a pencil. "Otherwise it gets confusing." I smiled softly. "You sound exactly like your grandfather." That made her grin. Slowly, patterns became impossible to ignore. For nearly 6 years, almost every public family photograph had been altered in some way before appearing online or framed inside Daniel's house. Sometimes the edits were subtle. My body cropped shorter. My face softened into the background blur. Other times I vanished entirely. But the originals remained untouched beneath the edits like buried truth waiting patiently underground. Chloe discovered hidden metadata inside several digital files showing edit timestamps and duplicate exports. "Grandma," she whispered one evening while staring at the computer screen, "Mom renamed one folder Cleaner Holidays." The word sat heavily in the room between us. Cleaner. As if aging itself were something untidy to remove from sight. I did not tell Daniel any of this. First I thought perhaps I should. But every time I imagined the conversation, I heard Thomas's note again in my mind. I tried talking to Daniel once. He said I was imagining things. Some people cannot see manipulation when it arrives wrapped in politeness and matching holiday sweaters. Around that same time, Madison announced plans for a large family anniversary dinner in early December to celebrate her parents' 40th wedding anniversary. "It is going to be elegant but intimate," she wrote in the family group chat beside a champagne emoji. "We are putting together a slideshow of family memories for after dinner." I stared at the message for a long moment before setting my phone aside. A slideshow? Of course there would be one. Madison loved curated memories almost as much as she loved controlling them. 2 nights later, Chloe arrived carrying a flash drive in her coat pocket. She looked nervous when she handed it to me. "I copied some of the original files from Mom's laptop," she admitted quietly. "Just in case." I plugged the drive into my computer and opened the folders slowly. Hundreds of photographs appeared across the screen. Original versions. Untouched versions. There I was laughing beside Thomas at our final wedding anniversary dinner before his diagnosis. There I was holding Chloe's hand at the county fair. There I was standing beside Daniel during the first day he moved into his new office downtown. Entire moments of my life restored with a single click. My throat tightened painfully as image after image filled the screen. It felt less like looking at photographs and more like recovering pieces of myself I had unknowingly mourned for years. Chloe sat quietly beside me while snow began drifting softly outside the dining room windows. "Grandma," she said carefully after a while, "what are you going to do with all this?" I looked toward the growing stacks of restored albums spread across the table. Then I looked back at the untouched photographs glowing softly on the computer screen. For the first time in a very long time, I did not feel invisible. I felt seen. And that feeling changed something inside me. Forever. The anniversary dinner took place on the first Saturday in December at a private event room, inside an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. Snow covered the sidewalks outside, softening the city into something almost peaceful. But the moment I stepped into that glowing room beneath crystal chandeliers, I felt the familiar tightness settle quietly in my chest. Madison had organized everything beautifully. Of course she had. Gold table settings. Cream roses arranged in tall glass vases. Candlelight flickering against polished wine glasses. Every detail looked carefully curated, right down to the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers near the ceiling. The room was already crowded with relatives, family friends, and neighbors greeting one another warmly, while waiters carried trays of appetizers through the crowd. Madison moved through the room effortlessly in a dark emerald dress, smiling at everyone with practiced elegance. "Evelyn," she said brightly when she spotted me near the entrance. You made it. I would not miss your parents' anniversary, I replied calmly. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the small leather portfolio tucked beneath my arm before returning to her polished smile. You look lovely tonight. Daniel hugged me moments later, distracted and tired in the way he often looked lately. Mom, wait until you see the slideshow Madison put together, he said. She spent weeks on it. I glanced toward the large projection screen glowing softly near the far wall. I am sure she did. Throughout dinner, I watched quietly while conversations drifted around me like background music. Madison laughed often. Her mother dabbed tears during the anniversary toast. Chloe barely touched her food. Every few minutes she looked toward me from across the table with nervous eyes. Beneath the tablecloth, I rested one hand gently over the flash drive hidden inside my purse. By the time dessert arrived, the room lights dimmed slightly and Madison stood near the projector smiling proudly. Before we finish tonight, she announced warmly, I wanted to share some special family memories celebrating 40 beautiful years. Applause rose softly around the room. Then, the slideshow began. Perfectly edited photographs filled the screen one after another. Vacation pictures, holiday dinners, weddings, birthdays. Every image polished with warm lighting and careful composition. Every image missing something. Missing me. I sat quietly while guests smiled toward the screen. Daniel watched proudly beside Madison without noticing the empty spaces where his mother should have been standing. Then halfway through the slideshow, Chloe suddenly stood up. The room grew still almost immediately. Actually, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, Grandma brought something too. Madison's expression changed so quickly most people would not have noticed it. But I did. For the first time in years her smile slipped. Chloe, she said carefully, sit down, honey. But Chloe was already walking toward me. My granddaughter reached for my hand beneath the table and squeezed it gently. That small gesture gave me more strength than she probably realized. I stood slowly and walked toward the projector while conversations faded into uneasy silence around the room. I only wanted to share a few restored family photographs, I said calmly. Madison stepped forward immediately. Evelyn, now is probably not the best. It will only take a moment, I replied softly. Then I handed the flash drive to the restaurant technician standing beside the projector. The screen flickered once. Suddenly, a new photograph filled the wall. The original version of a Christmas morning from years earlier. There I stood beside Thomas holding a tray of cinnamon rolls while Chloe laughed in matching pajamas nearby. Gasps moved quietly through the room. The image shifted again. Side by side now appeared the edited version Madison had used publicly for years. In that version I was gone. The room fell completely silent. Another photograph appeared. Then another. Original beside edited. Original beside edited. Years of missing moments returning one image at a time. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse anyone. I simply stood quietly beneath the glow of the projector, while the truth finally became impossible to crop away. No one spoke for several long seconds after the final photograph faded from the screen. The only sound left in the room was the soft hum of the projector and the quiet clink of silverware somewhere near the back tables. Madison stood frozen beside Daniel, her face pale beneath the candlelight while image after image remained burned into the silence around us. Original beside edited. Truth beside revision. I looked across the room slowly. Some guests stared down at their plates. Others glanced awkwardly toward me with expressions somewhere between shock and pity. But the person I watched most carefully was my son. Daniel had not moved at all. His eyes remained fixed on the final side-by-side photograph glowing faintly on the screen behind me. In the original, I stood between him and Chloe at the county fair holding cotton candy, while all three of us laughed at something outside the frame. In the edited version, only Daniel and Chloe remained. The empty space beside them looked strangely cold once you knew what had been removed. Mom, Daniel said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I did not know. Madison turned toward him immediately. Daniel, this is being completely misunderstood. But her voice lacked the smooth confidence it once carried. Misunderstood. Chloe spoke before I could answer. She was standing now beside our table with tears shining in her eyes. Mom, you deleted Grandma from years of pictures. I was organizing them, Madison replied sharply. Some photos looked cluttered. Cluttered. The word moved quietly through the room like smoke. Daniel looked at his wife slowly, then back toward the screen again. I watched realization settle across his face piece by piece. Not explosive anger. Something sadder. The slow understanding that he had allowed someone else to reshape his memories, while he remained too distracted to notice. I reached into the leather portfolio beneath my arm and removed the restored album Chloe, and I spent weeks rebuilding together. Cream linen cover. Gold lettering. Real photographs placed carefully inside by hand. I walked quietly toward Chloe and placed the album into her arms. "This belongs to you now," I told her softly. She looked down at it as though it weighed far more than paper. "Your grandfather believed memories should stay honest," I continued. "Even imperfect ones." Across the room, Madison lowered herself slowly into her chair without speaking. For the first time since I had known her, there was no polished explanation waiting behind her smile. Because some truths cannot be softened once they are finally seen clearly. Daniel stepped toward me carefully. His eyes looked older somehow. "Mom," he said quietly, "why did you never tell me?" I held his gaze for a long moment before answering. "I think part of me kept hoping you would notice on your own." Pain flickered across his face then. Real pain. The kind that arrives too late to undo what already happened. But strangely, I did not feel triumphant standing there. Only tired. Tired of shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's version of family. Tired of pretending small humiliations did not hurt simply because they arrived politely packaged. Outside the restaurant windows, snow continued falling softly across the dark streets downtown. Guests slowly returned to quiet conversations while the projector screen faded blank behind us. Life moving forward the way it always does after uncomfortable truths finally surface. Chloe wrapped her arms around me suddenly, holding the restored album tightly between us. "I do not want edited memories anymore," she whispered. I closed my eyes for a moment and rested my hand gently against the back of her head. Neither did I. Later that night after I returned home, I placed Thomas's old photograph back inside the cedar chest beside the restored albums. His handwritten note still rested against the faded paper. "Do not let them erase you, Evie." I smiled softly, then switched off the lamp beside the couch. Because for the first time in many years I finally understood something important. People can crop you out of pictures. They can blur your edges. They can pretend you no longer belong in the frame. But real love leaves evidence behind. And the truth always remembers who was